Hello. So what we're going to do here is get started and try to set up our project so that data will persist from scene to scene to scene. And this is really important in a variety of different cases. Um, the case that we're going to look at in this particular example is if you wanted to start audio in one scene and have that audio play continuously in multiple scenes. What we're going to do is we're going to set this up so that when we change scenes, it's not going to destroy that game object. We're also going to set it up so that only one of these audio sounds that will be playing, or this background music that will be playing within the game. And we're going to do that with the use of what's called a Singleton Pattern. So to get this started, what we'll do is we'll set up this scene. We're going to have multiple scenes here, and when Unity starts up by default, it's going to have this sample scene loaded, which you could just keep. What we're going to end up doing is making a new scene. So inside of our assets folder, we then have scene. And if you want to keep things creating inside of the folder, select the folder that you want to create the object in, and then click on the plus button here. And I'm going to go down to scene to create a new scene. And I'm just going to call this one scene 1. This is going to be our example scene that's going to start off our project. So let's open the scene up. And what we're going to do is create some text here to kind of label this as scene 1 at the start of the game. So, and we'll just pretend this is a game for now. This isn't going to be something that we're going to actually use in a game as a scene, but you're going to use the code here later on when we start putting the project together. So what we'll do now is go down to UI, and you'll see under UI you have a variety of user interface options. And Unity just recently came out with this new type of UI element called Mesh CRO, which has a variety of extra features on it and renders crisp and better text in the long run. I'm going to have a breakout session that goes into a little bit more detail with what the advantages of Mesh CRO is over the traditional UI system. But for now, we're just going to use this asset in our project. And it works very similar to the original UI that you could use earlier. But this text can actually be rendered in scenes and be rendered in high resolution. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on Mesh CRO, and it's going to give you this TMP importer. You're going to want to import the essentials here. I'll let that import, and then also we're going to want to import the TMP examples and extras. The TMP examples and extras isn't necessary, but these additional resources you can look at later if you want to kind of explore Mesh CRO more on your own after the fact inside of your project. And you can see there's documentation, some examples that you can take a look at with some scenes, and so forth. Alright, so you can see my new text that I just created is in the lower right hand corner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the position here of this in the rect transform. So the rect transform still works pretty much the same. It's just this Mesh Pro component you see here that's the only real difference. So I'm going to hit this at 0 and 0, and you can see the new text shows up in the middle. What I'm going to want to do is change the color here. So I'm going to go down to my text, and we're going to take a look at the color. And I'm going to shift this to black. Okay, so now that I've set up the color here, you can also set up outlines, by the way. But we're just going to leave this at this for now. And using the manipulator tool, what I'm going to do is get our canvas into view by double-clicking it in the hierarchy. And you can see that the canvas shows up here. There's a couple of things that you're going to want to do to set up this canvas. The first thing is you're going to want to pick an aspect ratio. So I'm going to go over here to the game view. And you can see a variety of aspect ratios show up that are relative to whatever your build settings are. We're building for a PC right now. So I'm going to set this to 16 by 9, which is a pretty standard aspect ratio for games. So once this is set to 16 by 9, you can see that this outline here changes. That is the safe boundary of your screen. So if anything goes outside of that boundary on your canvas, it'll be off the screen. And we're going to do a little bit more setting up so that this will remain on the screen. One of the things I also like to change here is, while I've got this selected, you got the canvas selected here. If you want to make sure that things stay relative to the scale that it is in the smaller viewport here, if you go to the canvas, there's this canvas scaler script here that is set to constant pixel size by default. And what that means is when the screen size changes, this text is going to stay the same size that it is here, and it's not going to scale in proportion to the way the screen is, like when you maximize on play or when you might render your game at different resolutions. So I'm going to change the scaler mode to scale with screen size. Okay, and what you could do is you can have this screen size matched to either width or height. This is really helpful also in mobile development, because in mobile development, especially on Android, you're going to be dealing with a variety of screen resolutions, and it helps to keep your UI elements and kind of have less work for you to do in the long run if you kind of design using this type of scale mode. Alright, so I've got this selected here, and I'm just going to rotate the viewport so that I can see my screen a little bit better here, and I'm going to set this to an isometric view so that we're looking at this dead on. And I'm going to try that manipulator tool, and I'm going to select the TMP text, and I'm going to increase the size of the text box here slightly. And what I'm going to do here is inside the Text Mesh Pro editor, I'm going to change this so that the alignment is centered within that box and also centered vertically inside of that box. And I'm going to increase the font size by clicking and dragging with the two arrows here to increase the font size. And I'm going to just change the text that's inside of it to scene 1. Alright, so now we have scene 1 in here. I'm going to create one more element. It's going to be a button. So with the canvas selected, I'm going to go over to UI, and then what we're going to do is we're going to create a Text Mesh Pro button. Okay, and really the button is still has the same components on it that the UI buttons do. It's just when you get down to the text level that's parented within it, you can see here that it's using Text Mesh Pro. Alright, so I'm going to head back up to the button here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to change its properties a bit. I'm going to set this to the middle of the screen by, not the width here, oops, hit the wrong value, the position and the X, set that to 0. And I'm going to click and drag the Y value down, and I'm just going to label this on the text level change scene. So this button is going to basically change between our different scenes, and once we import our audio, we're going to make it persist throughout the game. Alright, so I've got change scene in there. I can make the button back a little bit bigger by increasing the width here, and I think maybe a little bit more height. I'll set this to 35. And there we go. So we got a decent button here, and we also have a label for scene 1. So what we can do now is save this scene. So I'm just going to hit Control S to save it, and I'm going to create a new scene. So I'm going to go here to new. Actually, no, wait. Rather than create a new scene, I'm just going to duplicate the one that we have. So I'm going to select scene 1 here and hit Control D on the keyboard. And hitting Control D on the keyboard will duplicate the scene that we had selected, and hopefully duplicate the assets that we had in this scene before we save. So you got to make sure you save before you duplicate the scene. Alright, so if I double click on scene 2, we should see that up here in the upper left hand side, you see it changes to scene 2. And all of the assets that we had created are there. So it kind of saved us a little bit of a step there by just duplicating that scene. So I'm going to go to the text, and I'm going to change this to scene 2. Okay, so now we have scene 2. And for now, I'm just going to disable this button that is inside of that scene because we're not going to need it for this example that we're going to put together here. Alright, so with that all set, I'm going to hit Control S again to save and head back to the first scene. And in this first scene, what we're going to do is we're going to create a game object, and we're going to call this Sound Manager. And what this Sound Manager is going to do is basically allow us to play the sound and have it persist from scene 1 to scene 2. So let's give it a shot. So if we jump into this, let's go to the plus button here, and I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call this thing Sound Manager. And Sound Manager is going to have a script. So we're going to create a new folder to kind of organize our scripts here. So inside of Assets, I'm going to hit the plus sign, create a new folder, and call it Scripts. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new C# script here. And the C# script we're going to create is going to be called Sound Manager. So I'm going to hit the plus sign, C#, and call this Sound Manager. Alright, so now we have the Sound Manager script created. We're ready to start programming this, but we also need some audio. So to import this audio, I'm going to right click and go to Import New Asset. And I'm going to go to my desktop, because on my desktop I've got this Unity tutorial assets, and I'm going to bring in this sound file. This sound file is available on Canvas. You can also get it on soundj.com, which is a free audio website. And it's just some basic audio. Whenever you bring audio into Unity, you always want to test it to make sure that there aren't any digital rights management that might prevent it to play, or that the codec is supported by Unity. So I'm going to hit play. And that's the audio that's going to play. Alright, so we have the audio in there. Might as well create a new folder for sounds. And I'll drag and drop the audio into that sounds folder. And on our Sound Manager, we're going to need a component for the audio. So I'm going to go to Audio, and we're going to add the audio source to it. Now we could just drag in this audio clip into here and get it to play. But what we're going to end up doing is just having it set through the code. So what we're going to do now is, I think we're ready to start programming. So let's open up the Sound Manager. I'm running Visual Studio 2017 on my Windows machine, but you could use pretty much any flavor of Visual Studio that you like, as long as it's compatible with Unity and your IntelliSense is set up and everything. Alright, so inside of our Sound Manager class here, we're going to set up a few variables to store our audio. So the first is going to be a public variable, because we want to be able to access it through the editor. You could also set this up as a serialized field if you like, but setting it public will be just as fine. I'll call this audio source. Not getting to where I want it to be, so audio source. And what we'll call this is audio player. Alright, so we have audio player created. I'm going to create another public variable here, and I'm going to call this audio clip. So the type is going to be audio clip, and we'll just call this clip. Alright, so that's pretty much all we need to store this background music that we're going to be playing. But what we're going to do here is we're going to have this just start playing the audio immediately when we start up our game. So in the start function, what we'll do here is I'll say audio player. Oops. Audio player dot play one shot, and then we're going to pass to our clip. And there we go. So that's pretty much all we need to get the audio playing. Now you're probably saying to yourself, oh, well, that's not too crazy. But what we want this audio to do is persist through a scene change. Okay, so what we're going to do is, for now, in this script, because I really don't want to have to create another script to just demonstrate this, we're going to create a reference here to the scene management. So we're going to say using Unity Engine .scene management. Okay, and we're going to create a function here and this has to be a public function because we're going to want to access it with that button that we created. And we're going to call this a public void, and we're going to call it change scene. Alright, so we've got this set up to change scene. So we're just going to call a code to change scene. So scene manager dot load scene, and we're going to load the next scene, which is going to be scene 1. Now remember, our scenes in our build goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You also call it by the name of the scene, but I'm just going to call it by the number for now. Alright, so we've got it so that we have a function that we can call from our button to change scenes. And I just want to demonstrate how this is going to work at the moment before we set up the persistence for this. So with that said, save this and go back to Unity. And let's select that sound manager and drag and drop the sound manager script onto it. You can see that this audio source, we're going to leave this open. That's going to be set. Actually, yeah, it's going to be set inside of Unity. The next thing we're going to do is, or we can actually drag itself into here. So we can drag itself into here to do that. So drag the sound manager into this to set this. And then go to your sounds folder and drag and drop the sound, the audio clip, into where it says clip here. So if we hit play, you should hear the audio start playing. Don't try to change scenes yet because we haven't set up that button. So open up your canvas and select your button. What we're going to do now is we're going to set this button so that we can change the scenes. So if you scroll down, I'm actually here inside the button. So inside the button component, go to where it says on click and click the plus sign. And what this is looking for is a game object that's hosting the script that we want to reference that function on. So the game object that we have in our scene right now is this sound manager. So I'm going to drag and drop the sound manager into here. And now if I go to the list of functions, we should see the sound manager class show up. And if we look here, any of the public functions that are inside of that class will be available in change scene is right here. So now it's set up so that when we click that button, it'll call that function, and then it'll execute the procedure in there to change the scene. So what we need to do now is set up our build settings to be able to change between the scenes. So I'm going to go up to File, then Build Settings, and I'm going to add this open scene. So scene 1 will be 0. You can see the index here at the opposite end. And I'm going to drag in scene 2. So it shows up right below, and that's scene 1. Alright, so I'm going to close the build settings, and now that we have that all set up, we should be able to test this. So I'm going to hit play, and down inside of my game view, we'll click change scene, and we hear that the music stops when it switches scenes. And that's because Unity destroys any of the game objects that are in the scene when it switches from one scene to another. But what if we wanted game objects to persist? What if we wanted them to stay within the game from scene to scene to scene, like this audio? We want this audio to play continuously between multiple menu screens. We can set that up using a function called don't destroy on load. The only problem with don't destroy on load is that when we return to this scene, it'll create another instance of that audio. So we'll have multiple versions of that audio playing on top of one another. So there is a design pattern that we can use to stop this from happening, and it's called a Singleton Pattern. I'm going to jump back into our code, and what we'll do is we'll make a Singleton Pattern right inside of our sound manager so that it'll persist, and then if we ever return back to this scene, we'll set it up so that it doesn't create a new one. You usually want to do this in an awake function. So I'm going to type in void awake. Now the awake function gets called a little bit differently than the start function. It gets called immediately when your scene executes. So it gets called before any of the other code gets called, which is a good point to create a singleton. So you want to make sure that nothing else is there once you start this. So we're going to need like an if-else statement here. So we're going to need some sort of condition. And inside of the if statement, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if there's an instance of here. And if there isn't, we're going to allow it to create itself. But to do that, we need to create something called a static variable. And a static variable will make this object available in all of the scenes. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a public static, and this public static is going to be a sound manager, so of our sound manager class. And we're going to name this instance. You can name this whatever you want, but it's good to know that it's an instance. Alright, so we have it set up as an instance, and in our if statement we're going to say if instance, if instance is equal to null. So if instance is equal to null, we're going to set this as instance. So we're going to say instance is equal to this. Else, what if this thing's already created? So what if there's already an instance of this that exists? We're going to destroy the one that is a duplicate. So we'll call it game object. Destroy game object. Then after this, what we'll do is we'll say don't destroy on load game object with a lowercase g. So what this will do is it'll tell this thing to not destroy itself when it gets created. Alright, so with that said, this should be all set. Let's save it. Minimize Visual Studio. Hit play. Audio starts up. Change the scene 2. And audio continues to play. I don't know if that's going to turn down the audio for you, but I'll pause it here. And what we'll do is we'll take a look here at the don't destroy on load, and you can see that sound manager was carried over from the previous scene. Alright, pretty neat, right? And if I stop this, we'll return back to scene 1. So that's a way to be able to get data to persist from scene to scene to scene. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a game manager in a little bit that's going to handle all of our game management functions and any inventory and any score data and player data that we'll need in between the scenes, so we'll always have access to it throughout our game. Alright, so one last little test for our Singleton pattern that we just created. What we're going to do is we're going to go to scene 2 and bring back that button. So I'm going to save this. And I'm in scene 2, and I'm going to make this button available again. And I'm going to create a new function inside of our script. And yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this function and paste it down below. And I'll call this change scene back. And I'll label this as 0. So if our excuse me, I had a capital A there. If we go back to the previous scene, what should be happening now is that when we get back to it, it doesn't create a new one. So it basically maintains the original instance, and if it tries to create a new one, it's going to destroy it immediately. So let's see if this works. I'm going to save our script. And then on our change scene button here, what we'll do is we'll scroll down here, and we're going to need this script to be available. So I'm going to go to the main camera here, and maybe that's not the best example of that, but we'll try it. Let's see. Drag sound manager onto the main camera. I think I need a separate script for it because it's going to be looking for sound manager and it will destroy our main camera. So yeah, we can't just do that. Let's create a quick script. So I'm gonna go to scripts, hit plus, C# script. I'm just gonna call it change scene. We'll delete this script after because we're not gonna need it. Alright, so I've got change scene here. I'm gonna cut this completely out. So Control X, the new function that we wrote here, and I'm going to resave Sound Manager. And let's open up Change Scene. And I'm just going to paste this below the update function. So we got Change Scene back here. And we need to use the scene management class. Alright, so I've got that all set. I'll save it. And for this one, what I'm going to do is just drag this change scene onto the main camera here. And now what I'll do is I'll go down to our button, down to where the on-click event is, and add an event. And I'm going to drag and drop the main camera in here because that has that new script that we just wrote to change the scene. It also has Sound Manager. Make sure you remove Sound Manager. So I'm going to remove that Sound Manager component from there. Alright, so if I go back to the button, I got main camera here. And if I take a look at here, here in the functions, list of classes, and I'll go down to change scene back. So I've got change scene back here. And I'll save this scene. And let's go back to scene 1 and hit play. So our audio is playing. I changed to scene 2. Just gonna pause it. You can see here it's in the Don't Destroy on Load. And I'm gonna click this button to go back to scene 1. And now I'm back in scene 1. You can see we only have the one sound manager, and our original scene doesn't have the sound manager there. So it is working the way it's supposed to. I'll just flip back and forth a few times. Oop, it's not going to scene 2 because this sound manager it's not going to go back again because this sound manager isn't the same one that's loaded into here. It's missing an object now when we come back around because it's looking for that original one. So what we would have to do is rewrite our script to dynamically grab this and assign it. But we'll just leave it at that for now. But you kind of get the point. We were able to leave. So I'll rerun this. Leave the scenes. And then change the scene back. And it didn't create a new one. So that's pretty much it for this video. Next one we're going to take a look at creating a game manager. But first, before we do that, we're going to take a look at generics. Generics are a way that you can pass data to a function without declaring what type of data it is. So we're going to look at an example of that, and then we're going to look at how we can take this singleton pattern and extend the mono behavior class so that whenever we need it to be a singleton, we could just say, hey, you have this singleton functionality. So we'll take a look at that in the next video.